My guests today are Daniel Perkins and Sheriff Richard Mack. Dan Perkins is an author, broadcaster, and media personality whose career spans publishing, radio, television, podcasting, and veterans advocacy. Through danperkinsmedia.org, he has produced and hosted more than 5,000 podcast episodes, reaching an audience of more than 600,000 listeners each week, while also appearing regularly on radio and television programs as a commentator on current events. Richard Mack, Sheriff Richard Mack, is an American politician, author, and constitutional rights advocate, best known for serving as sheriff of Graham County, Arizona from 1988 to 1996. A former lobbyist for Gun Owners of America, Mack is recognized for his role in a landmark legal case that challenged federal overreach in law enforcement. As I said before, Dan is a prolific author, obviously, and his latest book that he has co-written with Sheriff Richard Mack is The Democrat Murder of America. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see a picture of the cover of the book. Again, it's The Democrat Murder of America, Demagoguery in the First Degree. Dan Perkins and Sheriff Richard Mack. Sheriff Richard Mack and Dan Perkins, welcome to the Bruce Collins Show.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, well, thanks for having us. Thanks, man.
Now, before we get into the new book, Dan, can you tell us about your nonprofit work?
I established with my wife a foundation about 13 years ago to deal with traumatic brain injury, PTSD, sleep deprivation, and suicide for American military veterans. We started off in a battle with the IRS to get the tax exempt number for our foundation, but it's now 13 years later. We're in 248 veterans facilities, and we've treated over 28,000 veterans over our term, giving them an MP3 player that really amplifies the name of the foundation, Songs and Stories for Soldiers.
So again, the new book is The Democrat Murder of America. How did this book come about? How did you meet each other, and how did you decide on writing this book?
Well, as you said, I'm a current events commentator, and I have been for several decades. And I would say about 5 years ago, I kept seeing on every Monday morning the number of people that were shot and killed in Chicago. It kept going and going and going. And I kept wondering, where were the police? And Chicago now, for 13 consecutive years, is the murder capital of the United States. And I define that by the total number of people that are shot and killed, not the percentage of the first of every 100,000. And so I started writing as commentaries about what was happening to the political process. And I started to dig into, for example, the FBI crime statistics for the top 20 cities in the country. 19 of them are run by Democrats. 19, and have been run for a long period of time. And so when we saw another round of this shooting that took place in Chicago every weekend, I decided I had to do something that I could publish in time to get it to the consumers before the midterm election. And I was interested in writing the history of violence from the founding of the Democratic Party to today. And I was doing an interview with Sheriff Mack on one of the shows that I'm on, and I said, I'm going to call him. I'm going to tell him about what I'm trying to do and see if he wants to play. And I spent maybe 10 minutes at the most with the sheriff, telling him what I want to do, and he says, "I'm in. Whatever you want me to do, I want to support it." And he's been a slave driver. He's we both wrote for the book. He was making sure that we got on time, and in a very short period of time, once we started working on the book, we knew we had to get it out by mid-July. And now we've had the paperback available for 3 weeks, Sheriff?
Yeah, 3 or 4 weeks.
And,
Yes.
and we have an ebook, and soon we're going to have, it's produced, we just got to get it up on the website, a phenomenal audiobook that people who have listened to it.
It's there. It's there.
Is there
Got
now?
put there last night.
Okay.
Yeah, late last night.
It's a fabulous book. And I said to the sheriff, I love audiobooks, not only for their convenience, but it dawned on me when I was listening and producing the audiobook. When you read a book, if you took up that book right now and started to read it, the way you're going to do it is you're going to read to yourself. So what you're going to hear in your mind is your voice. Good or bad, you're going to hear it. But when you have a professionally produced audiobook with talent that has great articulation and emotion in their voices, it's a totally different story. I mean, it's the true story, but I'm saying it's a totally different experience. And that's why about 30% of the books sold in America today are audiobooks.
Well, and Bruce, for me to follow up on that a little bit, I had never heard of Daniel, didn't know anything about him. 9 months ago, I had no clue what he was. As a matter of fact, we still haven't ever met in person.
Right.
And so, but we've done a lot of this. And after that podcast, I didn't even remember if he was hosting or if he was just on with me. I still don't remember which one was it, Dad?
Co-hosting it, but that's all right.
You were co-hosting.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then he asked me during the show, he said, well, your story's pretty compelling. And have you ever written any books? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, I want to talk to you after this podcast. I want to talk to you and I'm going to send you a Zoom link if you're available. I said, yeah, I can do it. So he wanted to see my books and I showed him 3 or 4 of my books. And I've written 7 or 8, and I think this one's number 9 now with him. And he said, after I showed him, we talked about 5 minutes, and he says, I want to write a book with you. And I said, for what? And then he told me about how we want to get this information out about what the Democrats are really doing to destroy our country by the midterms so that it has an impact on the success of or failure of the elections to keep good people in office. And I was totally with it. Yes, absolutely. Let's do it. Yes. And I'm going to tell you the result of that, of us coming together, there has been so much. And I don't care if people listening to the program are religious or not religious or believe in God or don't believe in God. That's your prerogative, because in America, that's your choice. But I'm telling you, there was constant inspiration behind this book, including the title and the cover. But it went on after that. And Dan would ask me about something. I go, oh, yeah, I was just thinking of that, And this book, I mean, look at, I didn't even know who he was 9 months ago. 6 months later, we have this book done. 6 months. And I don't know if anybody has ever written a book before, especially as extensive and detailed as this book is. That's overnight. This book was really promoted by a higher authority than just Dan and me.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. There's an old saying, coincidences are God's way of staying anonymous, although I don't know how anonymous that really is.
Yeah,
and you mentioned,
point.
Dan, liberal strongholds being murder capitals.
Yes.
And isn't it ironic that all those cities have gun control? Just stating the obvious.
It is.
Now, in your
and remember that one of the messages that we're talking about in this book is this is really a history book. It's a chronological history of violence in the founding and continuation, even to today, of the Democratic Party. But one of the things that I've been telling in interviews that I've been doing is that there's an old Chinese proverb, and it says, if you give a man a fish, he can feed himself for the day. If you teach a man a fish, he can feed himself for the rest of his life. The Democratic Party, since 1828, have been giving out fish. They don't want people to become independent. And we needed to help bring that information to the public. And we're hopeful that we can get this book in Democrats' hands who are not as far left as what the rest of their party is, and independents, and even Republicans, and read this, because I can't tell you how many people that have read the book that have told me I didn't know most of the stuff in this book. I never realized it happened. For example, in the book, we talk about starting with prior to the Revolutionary War. Originally, the Democrat Republican Party was formed in 1790, and it lasted until 1820 when they split apart and the Republicans went away and the Democrats became the Democratic Party. But after the Civil War, where the Democrats were opposed to it and it led the South out of the nation, we had a thing called Jim Crow, and it was in force from the 1880s till 1950. It's hard to believe it was in that long, separate but equal, but it never was. And what happened was there was an organization that looked at violence after Jim Crow was put in effect. In that period of time, 4,000 black men can be identified, probably much more, but 4,000 black men were hung in the South. But the thing that nobody knew until we brought it out is that the abolitionists from the North, the white Republicans, came into the South to help work to preserve the rights that were given to the black people. And in the time we killed 4,000 black people, we killed 1,200 white Republicans in the South.
Yeah.
And our book is full of those things that people never knew, and were never talked about in our schools. And I get responses from people, why weren't we taught this? And I said, because the Democrats have control of the public school system. They're deciding what the curriculum's going to be.
I have an excerpt from your book, and you write, Democrats have a very long and sordid history of racism, cruelty, corruption, killing, and election fraud. And we mean a very long history. And you show it in your book, The Democrat Murder of America, again by Dan Perkins and Sheriff Richard Mack. You also touch early on, and you say that the United States is not a democracy. And what we've seen lately in terms of the definition of democracy in America is mob rules. However, we know that this nation was started as a republic. Can you touch on this, this verbiage? Why is this so important that Democrats say it's a democracy?
Well, first of all, you just alluded to that we were intended to be a republic. And in fact, Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says the United States government shall guarantee to each state a republican form of government. And then get this part too. This is kind of funny. Well, it's not funny, but it's a quote from the Constitution itself. And shall protect each from invasion. So they're supposed to be protecting our borders. So that's not a Democrat prerogative. Okay, it's not a government prerogative. It is an order by the Constitution that our borders are protected. Look what they've done there, which has increased the voter fraud and election fraud exponentially by 100 times. And so, but what's the difference between Republican and Democrat? Democrat is just as you said, Bruce. It's a mob rule. And we say the definition that was given to us by founding father Ben Franklin. He said a democracy. And so this shows intent of the founders. They had no intent to make us a democracy. Quite the opposite, quite the contrary. And so he said a democracy are two wolves and a lamb voting what's for dinner. And that's the case. That's what it is. A democracy allows government to do anything they want as long as they get one more than 50%, which, just as you said, it's mobocracy. And the rights of the others, of the minority, are completely ignored or violated, or even worse, are tyrannically taken over. And so a republic respects and protects the rights of the individual. And and the book compares that to Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks didn't get hardly any support from the black community or even her own husband and family when she refused to give her seat to a white man. And so what should have, I want every American, especially every peace officer and sheriff, to answer this question. What should have happened to Rosa Parks that day? She should not have been arrested. She broke no law, and she stood for what's right. And now it looks like our book is really supporting defending civil rights, and it does, for all people. And that's what all Democrats have to understand. And after you look at that history that you were just pointing out, you and Dan both, about the sordid cruelty and crimes committed by the Democrats to and towards black people, the biggest question I think we ask in the book, at least in that part of the book, is how did any freed slaves ever stop voting for Republicans, which they were totally, 99% totally supported the Republican Party because Lincoln was Republican and Republicans were actually trying to end slavery and Democrats just the opposite. So
Right.
How did it turn to where now 80% of blacks are supporting Democrats? Well, the book brings that out, and it's very sordid history.
Yeah, I would also like to just to point out, follow up on what the sheriff was saying. If you ever run across somebody who says that we're a democracy, you ask them this question. Find me any passage within the Constitution that mentions the name democracy. There is none. How many times? Many, many times a republic is used in the language in the Constitution. So there's no constitutional basis for America being a democracy. It's just what the Democrats have decided they want to do.
And then you have to ask yourself, Bruce, why have we been lied to about that? Why the change? Because again, it produces tyranny and control and bureaucrats.
Mm-hmm. Now, again, in your book, The Democrat Murder of America, you make a point of including excerpts from George Washington's farewell address.
Yeah.
Why did you include that?
We did that because if you read that address, and it's long, it's like 7,500 words, you see that the first president of the United States in his farewell speech, and he didn't give the speech, he wrote it and it was sent to the newspapers and printed. He never made the speech. But what he's trying to tell people, it was a warning of what the future might hold if you don't take care of it. And Abraham Lincoln said, no outside intruder can ever make us collapse as a country. Only it comes from inside. And that's what we're seeing today with the far left trying to destroy the Constitution and our form of government and replace it with something else. But they're not really telling us what the something else is going to be.
Well, let me answer that by quoting Washington. And this is on page 180 in the book. Political parties are likely to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men, in other words, corrupt politicians, will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government. And that was his warning. And that's exactly what we've done. We've turned the reins of government and the issue of individual liberty, we've turned that over to the Democrats and Republicans. And boy, have the Democrats absolutely slaughtered the principle of self-government and individual liberty. And they're replacing it now. They're literally trying to replace our Constitution with the Communist Manifesto.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And, it's interesting if you look at the progression of the Democratic Party. In my lifetime, we've seen lots of, quote, liberals, but still call themselves Democrats. We now have a left in the Democratic Party that's admitting that they're communist or socialist. And how can we, as a country, how can we elect people to high office who are firm believers in communism and socialism.
Yeah.
And why is that happening? Well, we happen to believe the reason it's happening is the reason why we wrote the book. The education level of millions upon millions of Americans about American history, especially what has happened with the Democratic Party, is not taught in schools. So they don't know. All they know is what they see on CNN or NBC or whatever from a Democrat espousing whatever he or she wants to say. And it's not the reality. But we find that the mainstream media for a long period of time has been an effective arm of the Democratic Party into helping them get to where they want to go.
Yeah. It's sort of a well-oiled machine. There's cogs in it. They seem to run the media, the schools, many large corporations. I used to work in Silicon Valley up until last year for a woke corporation, a semiconductor company. And the Christians would meet in secret at lunchtime in a conference room and just name it meeting. Meanwhile, you had all these other woke groups that would publicly parade around the company. And this is, they've largely been winning the propaganda war. I mean, we have to admit that. How does this get reversed?
Well,
Well, that's kind of the purpose of the book.
That's
It
great.
really is. It's the purpose of the book.
Right.
And, the title makes it like, oh, well, we're accusing all Democrats of murdering America. No, we're really not. We're trying to get your attention to get curious enough to look at that and go, I want to see what they're saying about my party. I want to see what they're saying about me and my beliefs. And so that's really it, because there is a peaceful and effective solution. Dan brought out specifically in the book about being a citizen journalist. And we want people more active, and we've got to be involved. And the American people, Jefferson even warned us that the price of liberty was eternal vigilance. And we say that probably several times in the book. And the thing of it is, the American people have got to wake up. We've got to be back in charge of this government, and take it back away from the Republicans and Democrats, especially the Democrats, and decide what we're going to do. Because if anyone were ever to listen to Ronald Reagan and President Trump right now, the greatest threat to America is the communist movement inside our country. And it's the greatest threat to our country right now. And so this book does provide a solution to all of that.
Right.
A
And
peaceful and effective solution.
right. And it's an example that I spoke to you earlier. The Democratic Party has maintained power because every time you give that person a fish, it makes it more and more difficult for them to want to go out and fish for themselves. And so what's happened over the decades and the centuries, the Democrats have created a dependent class in many minorities who expect free stuff. And so when you look at the election, for example, of Mondami in New York City, what did he do? He had a litany of free stuff that he was going to give to people, and the people said, "Okay, I'll vote for him and see if he comes through." But the problem is, in many of those 19 cities, some of those cities have been under Democrat rule
Control
for decades, not just a year or two, decades. And it's because they've taken away part of the incentive of what it means to be an American, to have a free and open society, and the opportunity to take advantage of opportunity. But the Democrats have so significantly used the American people. I do want to make one other point about what the sheriff was saying and what you were saying. We are finding now, for the first time in my life, the magnitude of the fraud in government programs, primarily administered by Democrats. The Democrats have been the beneficiary of many of these social programs where tens of billions, if not trillions of dollars has been stolen for the American taxpayer. There's almost like there's a new fraud every day. I mean, I saw a story last week where $225 million of funds were fraudulently taken from the school system. But it wasn't the big city schools, it was the little schools in small cities where the people had the ability to go in and manipulate the budgets, file false invoices. 220 million in 26 states. Half of the country has a corrupt school system on a local basis. Half, probably more than that. And so when you create all these layers of ways in which the Democrats can get money for their agenda, that's where it's coming from. It's coming out of our own pocketbook, the way they're stealing money out of us, and people are giving it to them. And then you've got the black money, the Soroses of the world, where they have the way to manipulate how their money comes in. It was said recently that Soros and his son gave away $100 million, $100 million since the last campaign trying to elect communists in the United States. $100 million. And so there's a lot of money in play, and the Democrats have figured out. So what's going on now is we're drilling down. Our administration is drilling down to find more and more fraud, whether it's in Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security. And I understand that they're looking at the fraud in Social Security, which I believe probably is going to be astronomical.
Yeah. But what we know alone is sobering. And again, I want to remind our viewers and listeners today that we're speaking with Sheriff Richard Mack and also Daniel Perkins, and the book is The Democrat Murder of America. I highly recommend this book. I've read it. It's a great book and very eye-opening. I've been hopeful, Dan and Richard, that Democrats would be met by the hand of justice in terms of the Biden crime family or the Russia collusion hoax. We have a lot of declassified documents coming out now that show how Obama was sort of leading the charge on the Russia collusion and Hillary Clinton was involved. And there's other forms of corruption, it seems like weekly, that we could talk about. But this never seems to happen, the prosecution of it. Are you hopeful that Democrats will be prosecuted for their crimes at some point?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, both of us are. And, wasn't it James Comey, the Republican? He was always touting the Biden crime family, and he said, "Oh, we're going to get their bank accounts, and we're going to subpoena all that, and now it's all gone. Where'd it go? Where did all that go?" And maybe one is that Joe Biden is not mentally capable of standing trial, and then he pardoned his son. So without those two main players, maybe they don't have any. But I really believe that Dr. Biden, Jill Biden, his wife, was probably the biggest part of all of that. And she's one of the biggest liars I've ever met in my life. Well, I've never met her in person, but ever seen on the news. Obviously, she was the one holding the puppet strings on Joe, keeping him in office when she knew darn well that he was not capable of being president. And then that's another subterfuge of the entire Democrat Party and the Democrat media that totally kept him in office. And then when he did that debate with Trump, oh, well, whoops, nope, he shouldn't be in office. So all the liars got exposed, and look at some of the worst criminals under Joe Biden. Though Alejandro Mayorkas, Garland, all of them were a bunch of criminals, and that's really what we bring out in the book, because the corruption of politicians is one of the biggest problems facing us this year, especially. And yes, I don't know where the DOJ is. I know they've gone after some, and there's so many that it's hard to pick up where you left off. But that judge that got arrested, Hannah, in Wisconsin, for trying to, for obstructing justice against ICE picking up a prisoner that she had in her courtroom. She's pled guilty. She's lost her job. And finally, we're going after some real criminals here, but that's only happened to like 2 or 3 judges. This needs to go much further than that. But we also have a sheriff in Las Vegas, Clark County Sheriff Kevin McMahill, who has now refused orders from judges to put dangerous criminals back on the streets like we see in LA and New York City and Chicago every day. He says, I'm not playing your game. And that's exactly what we need. And we need more sheriffs doing the same thing so that we're protecting the American people, even when our corrupt politicians refuse.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I don't have any firsthand knowledge of this, just my own experience and observation. I believe if the Democrats do not get control of the House in the midterm elections, which I don't believe they will, I think the country will reject communists and socialists in the government, and so we're going to get, now that I heard yesterday, probably 14 to 16 new seats for the Republican Party. I believe once Trump clears the midterm, and if he still has control of the House and the Senate, all the things that you're asking about is what's going to happen the last 2 years of his presidency. He's going to go after a lot of people. So. And I think what's going on right now is the Justice Department is gathering evidence. And as soon as the outcome of the election is done, I think they're going to start arresting people all over the place.
Yay.
Now, a recent article in Axios said Obama has been coaching Democrats behind the scenes leading up to the 2028 election. I can't imagine what the strategy will be. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the first is to ignore all the horrible things they've done, including bringing in international terrorists. So first of all, let's look at, really, I don't think the Republicans are doing enough right there. Just to point out that the Democrat Party and the Biden administration brought in tens of millions, probably right about 30 million illegal aliens. And that resulted in 400,000 children being sold into sex slavery. They say they don't know where they are. We know where they are. Okay? And Biden administration Democrats were complicit in that, completely and entirely. Not only that, though, this whole thing of bringing in 30 million people from foreign countries, and especially in Latin America, was to do one thing, and that is to stack the deck on the census and get them registered to vote. And, we can't get them registered to vote because not enough of them have ID. So that is part of their subterfuge as well in making sure that you're a racist and you're Jim Crow 2.0 if you require identification, which is by law that only American citizens can vote. And yet, look what they've done. They've turned it all around now, and they said they believe in democracy, but 80% of both Democrats and Republicans want people to show identification to vote. And yet Democrats are still fighting it tooth and nail. They're looking like they're blocking it successfully. So far, they have been, and with a little bit of Republican complicity. But this is absolutely the most treasonous, anti-American, the biggest crime committed against American, bringing in terrorists, bringing in cartels, bringing in pedophile rings and international slave markets, and bringing in this kind of drug dealing and fentanyl, and completely destroying our country from within. And the Republicans are not pushing that enough in this election years right now. They need to get back to it, because I don't think even the most devout Democrats, who we're really trying to talk to here, will put up with that if they really know and understand. They go, oh, yeah, that happened. We absolutely have got to show Americans everywhere what the Democrat Party has done. And yes, sometimes it has included murder.
Yeah. What we try to do in this book is, from a historical perspective, to help people understand that from the original founding up to prior to Joe Biden, most of the violence that was created by the Democratic Party was done through surrogates who were not officially members of the Democratic Party. The Ku Klux Klan was founded by the Democratic Party. The Jim Crow laws were put in place by the Democratic Party. Then
can I add one thing? Can I add one thing?
Sure.
And who are the anti-Semitic today? It's coming from the left.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
The
to build
Democrat
on that.
universities.
Sure. And so up until Joe Biden was elected, the Democratic Party used surrogates to do their dirty work. Murders, rapes, embezzlements, all kinds of stuff. But when Joe Biden was elected, and what Mack just said about the 30 million illegals that came in, now the Democratic Party hired itself through all the legislation they passed and the administrative things that they did at the border. So for the first time in the history of the party, they weren't using surrogates. They were using the government to get what they wanted to get. And so what we had was, I believe, every illegal alien who came into this country, murdered somebody, robbed somebody, raped a woman or a girl, crashed into other people with trucks and cars, all those accidents, all those murders, all those rapes, all those are direct responsibility of direct involvement by the Democratic Party. So they haven't gotten rid of their surrogates, but now they've become the biggest proprietor of murder and rape and illegal immigration and drugs and everything that the sheriff was saying. That's what changed. And a lot of people haven't seen that yet, but it's the Democratic Party who now took over its own attack on the country. And that's why they're calling themselves socialists or communists or whatever. They're trying to convince people that America is bad, wrong, and it needs to be changed. And we have to go to a communist manifesto type of government, and you give up your rights. And it's amazing that it turned so quickly. I mean, they had this model for almost 200 years of hiring other people to do all their dirty work, and now they've decided it wasn't either fast enough or effective enough. They're doing it all themselves. And whether it's fraud or whether it's murder, rape, whatever it is, they're all involved. And I think a significant number of Democrats are involved in it.
Yeah, I agree. Now, again, I want to remind our viewers and listeners, the book is The Democrat Murder of America. Dan Perkins, there you go. Sheriff Mack has one too, and also Sheriff Richard Mack. Now, before you gentlemen go, I bought this book. I make sure that, hell, there you go. Dan has one too. Before you go, I want you to explain where people can get this book, because I went on Amazon and did not find it. So there's a website.
It's not there yet.
Talk about the website, where people can go to find out more information in this book. And also, what's your prayer that people would proactively do with the information in your book?
Well, I'll let Dan handle the prayer part, and I'll handle the location. The location is murderofamerica.com. We just shortened the titles. Everybody hear that? All one word, murderofamerica.com. You can get the ebook, you can get the audiobook, you can get the paperback, which we were all just showing, or you can get all three or a combination, any of them. And folks, this is the most powerful book of the year. This really is. Dan and I can't take credit for all of it. It was so inspired. Both he and I felt it, as I said at the beginning of the show. This is to save America. This is to save the 26 elections, which is a vital and essential crossroads for our country. This is our opportunity to reject the socialists and communists that are taking over our country through their surrogate, the Democrat Party. And folks, we've got to do something about it. Get the book, get a copy for your favorite Democrat, and say, look, be offended by the title, be offended by the cover, but be curious enough to read the book and first start with the last chapter, the epilogue, and then pick some chapters that you really think you'll like. And maybe some of the book will make you mad. It certainly has. And that's logical and natural. However, we really want to come together, and we believe this book is essential to do that. So Murder of America, one word, murderofamerica.com. Get it and get it to your favorite Democrat.
Right, and we're discussing with Amazon when we can become an online seller, but
Right.
we're doing quite well with the books just on our own website, and
Good.
I think with the audiobook coming out tonight or last night, we now have something else to talk about in a whole different way. I think it's interesting that you use the word prayer,
Yeah.
because I wonder, do we pray anymore in this country? And what are we praying for? Are we praying for the downfall of the Republican Party, the assassination of Donald Trump, the impeachment of the cabinet? What are we praying for? I think it's important that when we sit down to have a conversation with the Lord, we ask for his guidance to make sure that the right people get this book. Because I know in my writing of publishing 10 books, and I've got 2 more behind these, every one of those books had an inspiration from the Lord to write it, as did this one. I think that you have to ask yourself, Lord, give me the strength to accept what I really am and see if I can change, and how can I change. And I think the last chapter, the citizen journalist, which Mack talked about, creates a way for us to bring back the silent majority. See, I believe a lot of people are not talking because they've been so intimidated by the Democrats of being racist or white supremacist or whatever, that they've been reluctant to say anything. And I'm saying we've got to give them the courage to go out and start saying something. And I think this book is part of that process of growing and developing.
Excellent. Again, it's The Democrat Murder of America, Daniel Perkins and Sheriff Richard Mack. Sheriff Mack and Daniel Perkins, thank you so much for being my guests this week. I recommend the book. I hope people get it. Murderofamerica.com. Go there today. And I hope I can have you gentlemen back sometime.
We'd love to.
Let's do it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.